The mere idea of an aquarium in Poprad seems like a cruel joke. Slovakia has no access to the sea. Poprad is a mountain town of 50,000 that has zero reason or desire for anything fish-related. The aquarium should not exist, yet it does. I have always been confused by its existence, but when I saw a posting for a night watchman job, I didn't hesitate. It was in a quiet part of town. Seemed like easy money. The only expensive thing in the aquarium was its prized attraction, Janoschik, the giant squid. The many-limbed creature must have cost a fortune, and transporting it to Central Europe could not have been easy. Yet the money spent on Janoschik would have not been of any interest to the local hooligans or drug addicts that might try to break in during the night. Janoschik didn't have a care in the world. He would just float around the central tank of the aquarium, occasionally snacking on one of the squids that were imported for him. All around the mammoth sea creature sat exhibits of freshwater fish native to the area. Carp, catfish, eels, trout. The selection of the other exhibits didn't differ much from the frozen food aisle. If Janoschik was an avocado, he was surrounded by a field of potatoes. The crux of my job was showing up at the aquarium an hour before closing time, ushering out what few visitors there were, and then patrolling the grounds until the place opened back up in the morning. For months, I was just content picking up a paycheck for hanging out with an octopus. But then, one day, everything changed. My boss, Mr. Kufa, was an alcoholic who long ago gave up on trying to hide the fact. The liquor kept him occupied, and he barely spoke to me, yet that particular morning, he screamed. He called me up on the morning of a day off and insisted that I show up to work immediately. Mr. Kufa had heard I spoke English. I was needed to translate. The owner of the aquarium had shown up. Henry Willow was an American scientist. He had paid for the aquarium to be constructed 5 years prior, and a family friend secured Mr. Kufa the job of managing it. Aside from bringing in the giant octopus and paying for its exotic live feed, he never interfered with business. That was, until he decided to visit that afternoon. He had finely trimmed facial hair and wore a strange garb that seemed to be a marriage between a lab coat and a suit. Willow wasn't alone. With him, he had two enormous men with shaved heads and dull eyes. Finding Mr. Kufa half a bottle deep into his workday was an unpleasant surprise for Henry Willow. The fact that the drunk manager couldn't communicate with him proved to be a much bigger inconvenience. Willow did not hide his annoyance. When I entered the room, he was screaming and looked like he was about to slap my boss with his notebook. Luckily, the muscle he had brought along didn't share his anger. The two giant men just stared off into the ether as their boss ranted and raved. I had learned most of my English from watching shows, and I've never had much time to practice, but eventually I managed to start translating. As his points started to get across, Willow calmed. He even managed a laugh or two by the time his orders were delivered. Mr. Kufa wasn't smiling. As I told him what Henry Willow wanted, all the drunkenness drained from his eyes and was replaced by fear. The fish in the exhibits were to be replaced over the following weeks. Willow's men would take care of the entire affair, and all they needed was a place to dispose of the old fish. Eventually, everything in the aquarium would be replaced. Everything in the aquarium would be new. There were liabilities and loss to consider, but it wasn't until the question of Janoschik had been brought up that Mr. Kufa's face tipped from confusion to fear.
Of course we'll replace him,
Willow exclaimed with sudden force and joy.
Octopuses are a thing of the past. It's time we made room for new animals.
The man's speech had shifted from a calm explanation to a sudden burst of energy. Even one of the giants that stood behind Willow seemed to be momentarily brought out of his trance to flinch. The aquarium potentially losing its only source of visitors might have been an unpleasant thought, but it was the realization that he was dealing with a madman that drained the blood from his face. Mr. Kufa started to stutter out questions that Henry Willow had no interest in answering. With a deep breath, the scientist spoke directly to me. With his voice slowly descending back to calmness, Henry Willow explained that the aquarium was to be left empty on the nights of the replacements. All security systems were to be shut off to keep things simple. None of the signage outside of the exhibits was to be removed. If any of the visitors inquired about any changes to the fish, management was to deny everything. A healthy bonus would be issued for discretion. Henry Willow handed me a list of dates scrawled in pencil on children's stationery. Telling me to explain everything to my boss, the scientist got up and left. For a moment, the giant stood by his chair, staring blankly at the wall, but eventually they left too. My boss was in complete disbelief about what we were being asked to do, but eventually he took the paper and told me to leave him be. The man I left the office was filled with despair, but by my next shift, Mr. Kufa seemed in more stable spirits. He was even, uncharacteristically, sober. He informed me that the aquarium would be following Willow's wishes and that I would get a bonus of €200 a month for keeping my mouth shut. I didn't ask him how much of the discretion bonus the €200 were. I was just happy for the $200. When the first replacement date came, about 2 weeks later, I enjoyed my night off and didn't think much of it. When I first got into the aquarium on the following day, nothing seemed to have changed. The fish looked just about the same. The exhibits remained unaltered and nothing in the aquarium seemed amiss. It wasn't until the lights dimmed and I started my patrol that I noticed something off. The school of fish in the minnow exhibit. They looked like something you could get in a bait shop, but with the lights of the aquarium turned down, I could see that the minnows were glowing. The light emanating from their little bodies was dim and took concentration to see, but it was undeniable. Henry Willow had made the minnows glow. The new exhibit consumed most of my attention that first night, but over the following days, the appeal of the glowing fish faded. The changes that were made to the fish would always be something small. The carp would shoot little bursts of water against the glass. The whiskers of the catfish would move as if they had a life of their own. The eels would swim just a little faster. I'd find that interesting on first sight, but as the changes lost their novelty, I would return back to spending my nights watching Janoschik sluggishly swim around the tank. Sure, I did wonder about what it was that Willow was doing to the fish, but I didn't worry too much about it. It wasn't any of my business. The €200 kept my mind at ease. I didn't worry about Henry Willow's replacements until, one night, I found Janoschik's tank filled with darkness. In the central tank, the giant octopus didn't have any reason to worry. His home was roomy, filled with plenty of live feed with no predators to fear. I'd never seen Janoschik ink. After the final replacement night, however, the inside of his tank was murky, with dark defensive clouds. Janoschik had seemingly changed overnight as well. I could still recognize the same giant octopus, but instead of swimming around at his own pace, he kept on following me as I walked by the tank. What made matters so much stranger was that he wasn't alone. Janoschik was surrounded by little squids and fish he used to eat. No emotion could be read from behind his slitted inhuman eyes, but I could tell that the octopus was scared, as were all of the other creatures flanking his nervous form. Off in the cloudy dark, I could see something shift. Fearing that there might be something wrong with the filtration system, I gave Mr. Kufa a call. It took him a while to pick up, but when he did, he had no interest in hearing about the filtration system. I wasn't being paid to investigate the safety of the tanks. I was just meant to make sure no junkies break into the aquarium. With a couple slurred sentences, I could hear that he was already drunk. Not wanting to fight a losing battle, I apologized and hung up. I had hoped that the tank would clear out on the following night, but it didn't. When I returned back to work, Janoschik looked much worse than he did the night before. His large orange body was covered in dark brown bruises, and some of the suckers on one of his tentacles seemed to be missing. The crowd of prey that had sheltered around the octopus had also grown considerably smaller. There was something else in the tank. It wasn't a fish, or a squid, or an octopus. From beyond the smoky ink, I could see its silhouette. It had arms. It had legs. The creature was far too small to be a person, but it was humanoid in nature. I did my best not to look too closely at Janoschik and busied myself with patrolling other parts of the aquarium. With a dull thud, however, the central tank called to me. It all happened in an instant. From the dark waters came a claw. A monkey-like claw that tried to grasp at the head of the octopus. As Janoschik fought off the intruder, the claw switched its target. With hooked talons, the monkey grasped one of the squids that was sheltering by the octopus and fled back into the dark waters. I called Mr. Kufa once more. The filtration of the tank being faulty was one thing, but Janoschik seemed to be in imminent danger from whatever had been put in his tank. My boss took ages to pick up. When he did, he was furious that I was interrupting him while he was at home. When I detailed the reason for my interruption, he told me not to patrol the central section of the aquarium anymore. Whatever was happening in the tank was happening with the blessings of Henry Willow. He'd give me 400 euros at the end of the month if I promised to keep it to myself. Without giving me a chance to respond, Mr. Kufa hung up on me. When he clicked off his phone, however, the call did not end. For a couple seconds, my phone was still lit up. On the other side of the call, I could hear the phone rustle. It was only after a couple seconds of this rustling that the phone actually went dark. Someone was listening in on our conversation. Memories of Willow's towering bodyguards quickly filled my mind. I had spent months in silent friendship with the octopus, yet I retreated to the exhibits in the back of the aquarium. I didn't want to see Janoschik get hurt, but I was much more concerned about my own safety. Spending time around the glowing minnows or the goofy catfish didn't calm me. Where months ago, the creatures seemed like innocent curiosities, they were now demented steps towards the violent beast in the main tank. When I finally left the aquarium at the end of my shift, I considered never returning. I considered calling Mr. Kufa, telling him a family emergency had come up and that I would not be able to work for at least a month. I even took out my phone to start my retreat. Yet I never dialed his number. At the moment, I convinced myself it was because the extra money was good and the job was easy and that if I kept to myself, everything would be fine. Now, however, I know that was a lie. I didn't call Mr. Kufa that morning because I was scared someone else might be listening in on the call. When I came in the following shift, Mr. Kufa had already left the office. Only the grumpy ticket lady remained. When I asked if anyone had complained about Janoschik, she shrugged. It had been a slow day. If anyone had words for her, she wasn't listening. When I asked her if she had seen the central tank herself, the ticket lady, proudly, told me that she had no interest in fish and that she hadn't moved past the ticket office in 6 months. I tried to let some of the old woman's disdain for her job rub off on me. For around 30 minutes, I found myself content looking at the strange carp and colorful minnows. But eventually, my fondness for Janoschik got the better of me. I entered the main hall. The water was clear. For a moment, I was relieved. I thought that maybe Mr. Kufa had taken my qualms to heart and had the filtration system fixed. Yet quickly, the clearness of the water proved to be a terrible omen. What I saw in the central tank chilled me to my very core. Janoschik was dead. Floating in the middle of his tank, the giant octopus had been robbed of most of his tentacles. The few bits of appendage that remained were bruised and cut with terrible violence. The sight of the familiar animal brutalized made me uneasy. It was only a fraction of the terror I was witnessing. What was worse, what was so much worse, was the sight of the creature that had delivered such violence onto the giant octopus. The beast was shaped like a chimpanzee, yet it had the face of a fish. The moss-like fur that covered its body shined with a luminescence of dazzling, shifting colors. With its savage claws, the creature ripped at Janoschik. With teeth as sharp as knives, the beast ate the octopus's flesh. The sheer terror of what I was witnessing made my hands numb. I dropped my flashlight. The monstrosity on the other side of the glass seemed to be in the midst of a manic feeding frenzy, yet the crash made its attention singular. Slowly, with an eerie gentleness, the creature swam towards me. Its eyes, a horrid grey mixture of mammal and aquatic life, watched me with curiosity. In its incomprehensible jaw, the thing thoughtfully chewed the dead flesh of my companion. I wanted to retreat. Desperately, I wanted to dull my brain with glowing fish and boring eels. All I wanted to do was to run away from the horrid amalgamation that stared me down from behind the glass. But I could not. The chimpanzee with the face of a fish, glowing all the colors of the rainbow. I was utterly mesmerized. The thing had me in a trance. Suddenly, the abomination snapped open its massive jaw. I stumbled backwards, brought back to reality by the sudden movement. Chunks of Yanushik flesh hung in the water like unanswered questions. Then, slowly, they started to descend down into the terrible maw of the fish thing. The creature was sucking water. Out of fear, I stumbled a step or two back. Yet curiosity kept me still. I wanted to know what the fish monkey was doing. In a terrible thud, the answer came. The beast was pushing a stream of water out of its mouth, like the replacement carp. The carp, however, only tapped the glass. The beast that swam before me that night sent it crashing down. The fish monkey's neck tore open with massive gills. Like the ventilators of some terrible amphibian machine, the gills sucked in water and strengthened the monstrosity's stream. A spiderweb of crystal broke out across the wall of the central tank. Before I had a chance to run, the glass wall fractured into 1,000 pieces and the world became wet. A wave of water knocked me off my feet, but I quickly regained my balance. The fish monkey's footing was less even. It crawled over the sharp edges of its tank, yet managed to move no further. It struggled with the broken glass, its gills heaving with punished effort. The thing looked as if it was about to die. But then, with muscles shivering beneath the fur of moss, the monstrosity started to rise. It took impotent breaths with its fish mouth. With each inhale it wheezed in a pained, shrill tone. The creature was struggling, trying to will its biology to perform an act it was not built for. With each breath, its vocalizations deepened. With each breath, the fish monkey grew stronger. The moment I was reminded of those terrible teeth, I ran. Behind me, I could hear the beast's darkening grunts, but its footsteps splashed with lack of balance. Their tempo quickly sped up. When I was sure the creature could catch me, I hid in the nearest place I could find, the janitor's closet. I stood in the darkness, shaking, praying for my soul. Out in the hallway, the creature's footfalls splashed. It ran past the door and towards the lobby. I held my breath. I waited for that monstrosity to be completely gone before I moved a muscle. The moment I was sure, the moment I could hold my breath no longer, I reached into my pocket and picked up my phone. I called Mr. Kufa. It was still early in the evening. Mr. Kufa would be drunk, but he would be awake. I begged the universe to bring him to his phone, yet the dial tone numbed all my hopes. Mr. Kufa was not picking up the phone. Past the tonal reminder of his absence, I heard something worse. The wet footsteps had returned. They were heading towards the door. As the dial tone dragged on, I could hear the fish monkey's gasps once more. They were of a dark tenor now. They sounded like grunts. Yet, as the creature's face descended towards the door, its wheezes grew shrill once more. The creature huffed at the crack of the door. Even though the thing had no nose, it was trying to smell what was inside of the janitor's closet. I stood as far back as I could. I pressed down on the nearest air refreshener, yet I could not mask my presence. The creature's hand retracted, and its grunts grew violent again. With a terrible thud, the door shook. The horrid amalgamation of life outside started to roar.
What seems to be the problem?
voice said, in crisp English, from the other side of the line. Mr. Willow?
That's Professor Willow.
The madman said, his voice calm as ice.
What seems to be the problem?
The thing! It's escaped! The beast's assault against the door continued. It roared with absolute animalistic fury.
What thing?
Willow asked, no doubt hearing the terror but speaking no less calmly for it.
Be more specific, please.
The thing from the central tank!
Oh!
The wood of the door snapped, and a terrible, glowing claw reached out into the tight space. There was a hint of joy in Henry Willow's voice.
If you had to give it a name, what would you call it?
What? I screamed, as the terrible creature started to force its shining body through the door. What the hell do you mean?
A name.
Willow's tone had broken. He was yelling.
A name! If you had to name the creature, what would you name it?
Monkeyfish! I screamed. Please, just send help! Just as the terrible thing was about to grasp me, a piercing tone rose through the air and made me clutch at my ears. Yet it caused the creature no pain. Instead, the terrible amalgamation cocked its horrid head to the side in curiosity. Slowly, it backed out of the hole in the door it had created for itself. Descending on all fours, the creature ran off into the hallway. Past the horrid sound, I could hear glass crash out in the lobby. Slowly, the tone subsided. My ears were still ringing from the shrill sound, but from the phone I could hear a labored sigh.
A poor choice of name.
Henry Willow said, with disdain.
Go home. The aquarium is to undergo repairs. Return back for your evening shift tomorrow. Sleep well. Think of a better name. Do not be late.
With that, he hung up. I was beyond shaken from the experience, and I desperately wanted to be in the safety of my own home, yet the terror refused to leave me. I stood leaned up against the edge of the janitorial closet, shaking and broken. For minutes, I cowered until I could will my body to move. I found the glass entrance of the lobby shattered. Not 5 meters from the entrance to the aquarium, a manhole cover lay strewn aside. The darkness of the Popperat sewers was dizzying to walk by. On the far side of the parking lot stood a black van. By it towered 2 familiar, identical men. One of them raised his finger to his ear. My phone rang. A blocked number.
Henry Willow speaking.
He said.
Calling to confirm that you will show up for your shift tomorrow and not impede any progress that has been made.
I did not hesitate to say yes. The 2 giants were staring straight at me. I had come far too close to death that night to take the risk of crossing Henry Willow.
Splendid.
The mad scientist said, and hung up. As he did, the 2 men climbed into their van and started the engine. Not wanting to be followed, I fled the parking lot and ducked into the dark park nearby. The last thing I wanted was for Henry Willow, or his men, to know where I lived. As I made my way back home, I avoided all major roads and kept my eye out for the van. Even though I ran most of the way, the journey to my apartment took much longer than usual. By the time I arrived home and calmed down enough to sleep, however, I considered myself safe. When morning came, that safety proved to be an illusion. The van was waiting outside of my apartment. The 2 giants stood guard, looking directly at my window. Henry Willow's men were far too big. My front door was far too flimsy to resist. Briefly, I considered calling in sick to work, but I knew that they would retrieve me if I wouldn't go on my own. When I arrived at the aquarium, Mr. Kufa was waiting for me at the lobby. I had seen the man drunk countless times before, but never like this. The man was soaked in sweat and could barely string a sentence together. Against his better judgment, he watched the security camera footage from the night prior. My boss wanted out. What's worse, he wanted me to take his place. He wanted me to be the one to deal with Henry Willow. The money. Mr. Kufa kept on focusing on the money. The measly couple €100 that he offered me to keep my mouth shut was only a fraction of Willow's discretion fund. There were tens of thousands being sent over each month. I could have all of it. I couldn't even have Kufa's entire paycheck. All I needed to do was to take on the responsibility of dealing with the mad scientist. No matter how much I resisted, Mr. Kufa kept on insisting. It wasn't until I said I would complain about him to Henry Willow that he finally closed his mouth. For a moment, a strong enough gust of fear washed through the man where I feared I was witnessing a heart attack. But eventually, he staggered off without another word. That shift, just like the night prior, I avoided the main hall of the aquarium. For about 30 minutes, I stared at the innocently aberrant fish in the side tanks. I would have spent the whole night avoiding the location of last night's horror, were it possible. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. With repetition and increased volume, however, the sound became unavoidable. Someone was clearing their throat in the main hall of the aquarium. Knowing that there was no avoiding the interloper, I ventured out to the place which I feared most. Everything in the main hall had been repaired. The mess of broken glass and seaweed had been cleared, and the main tank, although empty, was whole once more. In the front of the empty aquarium, flanked by his giant henchman, sat Henry Willow.
Have you thought more about the name?
He asked, with chilling casualness. It took me a moment to find my words, but when I did, he did not like my response. No, I told him, I have not thought about the name of the horrid abomination I had seen the night prior.
FishMonkey simply does not roll off the tongue. It's far too pedestrian for a creature so important. How about Aqua Ape?
Not knowing what else to say to the madman, I agreed. Aqua Ape did sound like a better name. Willow took my response in good stride. He asked me to sit down with him by the aquarium. He had more questions. His line of inquiry was completely unhinged, yet he asked it with complete calm. Henry Willow wanted to know if I found the monstrosity last night cute, and whether I would consider it a friend if it were to defend me in battle. The last thing I wanted to do was to continue conversing with the man, yet the dumb gaze of his massive guards kept me talking. They also kept me honest. I feared that it was all a test, that if I was to tell him I found the horrid amalgamation of biology to be friendly, he would label me a liar and have me disposed of. I told Willow that I feared the creature, that I was certain it would murder me were it given the chance. My responses were honest, yet they did not please Henry Willow. As I spoke, he scribbled angry notes in a flimsy paper notebook he had on his lap. At some point, as I regurgitated the horror I had witnessed last night, he had finally had enough.
I did exactly as my dreams have told me. I established this aquarium. I have developed the hybrid genome to near perfection, yet still your responses displease me.
He took a long pause, tapped his pen on the notebook, and then finally closed it.
Perhaps you are not meant to survive the final century. Perhaps your kind simply cannot understand. When the dust settles and the smoke clears, the new generation will embrace the Aqua Ape and the rest of the hybrids. That must be it.
He looked at me for reassurance. Not knowing what else to do, I nodded my head. Willow's questions that night made me deeply uncomfortable. Yet it wasn't until his parting words that I truly tasted horror. Henry Willow told me he did not trust Mr. Kufa. The man was a dullard and an alcoholic. There was no reason to replace him just yet. But were something to happen to my boss, I would become the new manager of the aquarium. It was not a question. It was not a job offer. It was a statement. As Henry Willow and his massive bodyguards left the aquarium, I couldn't help but to think of how sick Mr. Kufa looked last time I saw him. Sup, ghouls? It's me, Mike, the guy who writes all these stories, and occasionally reads them. I'm back. Well, back-ish. As some of y'all might know, I had cancer in October. I'm all good now, and the regular checkups seem to point towards me being all good in the long run too. But I'm sure you can imagine, things have been pretty hectic. My personal life has also been very dramatic over the past couple of months. Won't tell you about the deets, because dirty laundry doesn't belong in a public forum, but I'm sure the intricacies will blossom into stories in a year or two. Either way, Chamber is full of tales. So, a bit of a scheduling update. We're gonna be going to 2 videos a week for a while. Every Friday, you'll get an episode of the United People's Institute of Science, and every Monday, you'll get a chapter from my Brave New World audiobook. Also, as some of y'all might have noticed, Cabinet of Fever Dreams is back on your podcast platform of choice. New episodes every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday. There's 6 weeks worth of Upus stories ahead, and Brave New World has 18 chapters. Fear not though, once that content runs out, there's more. After this season of United People's Institute, there's a Upus novella heavily inspired by Blood Meridian, and an audiobook of George Orwell's 1984 coming up. So, behind the scenes, I'm quietly stacking up the release schedule, just so there's no more big gaps. So, I'm back-ish. Content will be posted here twice a week for the immediate future, and Cabinet of Fever Dreams will continue its usual run, but I'll be taking a bit of a back seat from the internet. I'll occasionally pop in to see how the videos are going and read your comments, but I work much better when I'm offline. So that's what I'm gonna do. There's new episodes of Clean Mind being put together, a bunch of video essay scripts laying around waiting for more drafts, and a bazillion of other things that I'm not at liberty to talk about. Either way, stuff is coming. I wanted to take this moment to also say thank you. I hate to brutalize the dead horse, but all the love and support I got through my little cancer journey made the weight of the tumor easier to bear. Truly, thank you. Also, thank you for sticking around during my absence. I know internet time moves differently, and 6 months of being gone reads as a decade in the flesh and bone world. So thank you for coming back. You know who gets the deepest thanks, though? The patrons! Big old thanks to Kus, Bob Condert, CR Cryptid, Christopher Barunda, Dante Kincaid, Matthew Trahan, Mr. CreepyPasta, Daniel Wengel, Quiet Pills, Charlie Cooper, Joyce, Paul Evans, Shion, and Hayden Solomos. If you'd like to join these fine folks in supporting the arts, getting early access to content, and your name in the credits, mosey on by patreon.com/Mike J. Langer. Alright y'all, that's it for me this week. I'll be pre-uploading most of the videos for the next couple of weeks, so I won't pop back in for any long updates like this one. Rest assured though, I'm making more stuff and browsing through your comments. Hope everyone is safe, sane, and healthy out there. Mwah!